A kind-hearted millionaire paid for an elderly woman's meal. Little did he know that just a few hours later, he would be in tears when the rain had come suddenly, sweeping across the city in thick, slanted sheets, drowning out the usual noise of honking cars and hurried footsteps. Streetlights flickered in protest as the wind howled through the narrow alleyways, bending signs and rattling loose awnings. The world outside was a blur of headlights and wet pavement, the kind of night that made even the busiest people slow down and seek refuge. Henry Crawford barely acknowledged the downpour as he stepped out of his car, his polished shoes sinking into a shallow puddle. The water soaked through almost instantly, seeping into his socks, a minor inconvenience, but an inconvenience nonetheless. He exhaled sharply, adjusting the cuff of his tailored coat as he scanned the dimly lit street. His usual restaurant, an exclusive members-only club, was on the other side of the city. There was no sense in driving through the storm just to sit in silence over a plate of overpriced steak. His eyes landed on a small diner tucked between two closed storefronts, its neon open sign flickering weakly against the rain. He hesitated. The place was entirely unfamiliar. He had never once stepped into an establishment that didn't take reservations weeks in advance. But the rain wasn't letting up, and his patience for standing in it was already wearing thin. With a quiet sigh, he pushed open the door. The bell above jingled, announcing his arrival to a room that barely took notice. A few scattered patrons sat hunched over their meals, shoulders drawn in as if trying to make themselves smaller. The air smelled of coffee that had been brewing too long and something fried. A young waitress behind the counter barely spared him a glance before returning to wiping down a set of chipped mugs. Henry walked toward an empty booth near the window, but a voice stopped him. "I told you already. We don't do handouts." His gaze shifted toward the counter, where the diner's owner, an aging man with a stained apron and a face that had long since lost the ability to soften, was glaring down at an elderly woman. She stood small and frail in her soaked cardigan, clutching the strap of her worn-out handbag. "Please," the woman, Donna, tried again, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion. "I'm not asking for much. Just something simple. My husband is sick, and my grandson hasn't eaten since this morning." The owner scoffed, shaking his head. "I can't just give food away, lady. You think I run a charity?" Henry felt something settle uncomfortably in his chest. The logical side of him told him to ignore it, to sit down and order his meal. It wasn't his problem. He didn't get involved in things like this, and yet his feet were already moving. "Put whatever she wants on my bill." The words came out sharper than intended, cutting through the stagnant air of the diner. The owner turned, blinking in surprise. Donna, too, looked up at him, her face registering disbelief before shifting into quiet gratitude. "Sir, you don't have to—" "I know." Henry slipped a hand into his pocket, pulling out a crisp $100 bill and setting it firmly on the counter. He turned toward the waitress. "Make it 3 meals, to go." For a moment, nobody moved. The owner looked at the money, then at Henry, his mouth tightening in something close to irritation. But money was money, and he knew better than to refuse a paying customer. With a grunt, he pocketed the bill and nodded toward the kitchen. Donna hesitated, as if unsure whether she should accept the kindness. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "Thank you. Truly." Henry only nodded, stepping aside as the waitress took her order. The rain still pounded outside, relentless against the diner's thin walls. He turned back toward his booth, but before he could sit, he felt a gentle tug at his sleeve. "Would you let an old woman buy you a cup of coffee?" Donna asked, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Henry studied her for a moment, debating. He wasn't particularly in the mood for coffee. He wasn't particularly in the mood for company either, but something about the way she stood, drenched, weary, yet still full of quiet dignity, made him pause. He gestured toward the booth. "I'll let you sit, but I'm paying for the coffee." Donna chuckled, the sound light despite the heaviness of the evening. Fair enough. They sat across from each other, the waitress setting down 2 steaming cups between them. Henry stirred his drink without drinking, watching as Donna carefully wrapped her fingers around the ceramic mug, letting its warmth seep into her hands. "You have a kind heart." "I never thought this was a big deal," he said simply. The rain outside had softened into a rhythmic drizzle, tapping lightly against the diner's fogged-up windows. The occasional car sloshed past, its headlights casting brief flickers of light across the damp linoleum floor. The air smelled of brewed coffee and faint traces of burnt toast, the kind of scent that lingered in places that never truly closed. At the corner booth, Henry leaned back slightly, absent-mindedly swirling his half-empty cup of coffee. Across from him, Donna sat with quiet ease, hands wrapped around her own mug, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested she had spent a lifetime adapting to discomfort. "Funny, you don't seem like the kind of man who walks into a place like this," she remarked, her voice warm but laced with curiosity. Henry huffed a short laugh. "That obvious?" Donna smiled, shaking her head. "Let's just say your suit doesn't exactly blend in." There was no judgment in her tone, only observation. Still, Henry shifted slightly, as if aware for the first time of how out of place he must have looked. The sharp contrast between his crisp attire and the worn-down setting. He had spent so much of his life in boardrooms and private clubs that a place like this, with its wobbly chairs and faded menus, felt almost foreign. "Storm forced my hand," he admitted. "Didn't plan on stopping here." "And yet, here we are," Donna said, as if there was something poetic about the coincidence. Henry didn't respond right away. Instead, he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck, and in doing so, his necklace slipped out from beneath his collar, the small silver locket catching the dim overhead light. Donna's eyes flickered to it briefly. "That's a beautiful piece," she said casually, before taking a sip of her coffee. Henry's fingers instinctively moved to the pendant, curling around it protectively. The compliment should have been harmless, just an offhand comment, but something about it twisted inside him. He hesitated, feeling the cold metal against his palm. "I don't wear it for beauty," he said, his voice quieter now. Donna set down her mug, sensing the shift. "Sentimental?" A pause. Then, with a slow exhale, Henry loosened his grip and gently opened the locket. Inside, a faded photograph rested beneath the glass. A woman with soft eyes, a smile that still haunted him, even after all these years. Her name was Bella, Henry murmured. The name settled between them, fragile and heavy. She was everything. For a moment, Donna said nothing. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was full of something deeper, something unreadable. Then, her breath caught. Bella. She looked at the picture again, really looked this time. The edges of the photograph were worn, but the face was unmistakable. The face of a girl she had once known better than anyone. Donna's fingers trembled against her coffee cup. "Henry," she whispered, as if the name had only just clicked in her memory. Henry lifted his eyes, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. "You..." She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "You're Henry. Henry Crawford." His brow furrowed. "How do you..." Then it hit him. Her face. The way she spoke. The familiarity that had been tugging at the edges of his mind since they first sat down. He knew this woman. It had been years, decades even, but now, under the cheap diner lights, the memory resurfaced, like something breaking the surface of deep water. Donna, he said slowly, the name feeling strange yet familiar on his tongue. Neither of them moved. You knew her, Henry said, barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. Donna's eyes glistened. She let out a shaky breath. She was my daughter. Henry stilled. The words didn't register at first. They felt distant, as if spoken through water, muffled by the sheer impossibility of them. Donna's daughter. Bella. His Bella. The breath he hadn't realized he was holding finally escaped him, and for the first time in years, Henry felt the weight of every lost second, every day that had slipped through his fingers without knowing where she had gone. "You're her mother," he said, barely believing it himself. Donna gave a small, broken nod. Her hands, once steady, now trembled against the table. Henry pressed his fingers to his temple, trying to steady himself. I searched for her. After we were separated, I tried. I really did." His voice cracked, and he clenched his jaw, blinking against the sudden sting behind his eyes. "But I thought she moved on. I thought she had a life, a family, maybe even kids. I told myself she was happy." Donna inhaled sharply, her expression shifting, as if she was about to say something that would shatter everything. "Henry," she said, her voice trembling now. "Bella never moved on." His chest tightened. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear the rest. "She died," Donna whispered, and the words hit like a punch to the ribs. 10 years ago. A hollow silence settled between them. Henry's grip on the locket tightened. "She's gone." The words barely escaped him. His voice was unrecognizable, fractured and raw. Donna reached across the table, her fingers brushing his wrist, grounding him in the moment. "She never forgot you, Henry," she said, and for the first time that night, a tear slipped down her cheek. Henry couldn't speak, couldn't move. For 10 years, he had been living in the shadow of something he didn't even know he had lost. The rain outside picked up again, drumming against the window in uneven beats. But inside the diner, the world had gone utterly still. The coffee had long gone cold. Neither of them had noticed. The diner, with its muted hum of conversation and clinking cutlery, felt distant, like a backdrop to a play neither of them had rehearsed for. Henry's hands rested on the table, fingers still curled around the locket. The edges of the photograph inside had been worn smooth over time, but Bella's face remained unchanged, untouched by the years that had stolen her away from him. Donna wiped at the corner of her eye, her breath shaky, but controlled. She wasn't the type to weep openly. Not anymore, not after everything. "I should have done more," she said, breaking the silence, her voice carrying the weight of too many regrets. "I should have fought harder for her." Henry lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" Donna hesitated, then let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the rim of her cup. After he forced you apart, Bella wasn't the same. She was quiet before, but this was different. She stopped playing the piano, stopped laughing the way she used to. And Aaron, he kept her close, too close. He wouldn't let her out of his sight. Henry's jaw tensed. He locked her away, didn't he? Donna didn't nod, didn't confirm it outright, but the way her lips pressed together, the way her fingers trembled just slightly against the ceramic mug, it was answer enough. "I tried," she whispered, almost to herself. "God knows I tried." But Aaron, he wasn't a man you could reason with. He thought he was protecting her. Henry let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Protecting her?" His voice was low and tight. "From what? From me?" "From heartbreak," Donna murmured. "From struggle. From the kind of life he thought you would have given her." Henry exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face, I would have given her everything." "I know," Donna said softly, but Aaron never saw it that way. He saw a young man with nothing to his name and a daughter who had been raised to expect more. And when Bella refused to let you go, She paused, swallowing. He made sure she had no choice. The weight of it settled deep in Henry's chest, an ache that had never truly faded, only dulled over time. He had spent years telling himself that Bella had moved on, that she had chosen to leave. It had been the only way to survive it. But now, hearing the truth, the real truth, it felt like something inside him was coming apart at the seams. "And now?" he asked, his voice quieter. Donna sighed, rubbing a hand over her forehead. "Now, he's just an old man. Frail. Sick. He doesn't leave the house much anymore." Henry scoffed, shaking his head. "That's not enough?" Donna looked at him then, really looked at him. What would it be? Henry didn't answer. He wasn't sure he had one. Henry recalled 10 years ago the powerful man standing in front of him, forbidding him to appear at his door again. "You will only bring misery and a troubled life to her." Those words seemed like yesterday. Henry tried every way to meet Bella, but Aaron did not even give him the chance to see her shadow. What more could a young man in his early years do? In the end, the hustle and bustle of life had suffocated his remaining feelings of love, creating the Henry Crawford sitting here. For a long moment, they just sat there. The rain outside had softened again, tapping gently against the glass. "He still hates me, doesn't he?" Henry finally asked. Donna hesitated. "I don't know if it's hate anymore," she admitted. "Maybe just guilt." Henry let out a slow breath, tapping his fingers once against the table before pushing back in his seat. His movements were deliberate and measured, but there was something storming beneath the surface, something restless, unresolved. "Take me to him," he said. Donna blinked, startled. "Henry, you don't have to—" "I do," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "I need to see him. I need to look him in the eye and—" He stopped, shaking his head slightly. "I don't even know, but I can't leave it like this." Donna studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether this was something he truly wanted, or if it was just the weight of the past pushing him forward. Then, with a small nod, she reached for her coat. "All right," she said, "let's go." Neither of them spoke as they stepped out into the damp night air. The street was quieter now, the worst of the storm having passed, leaving behind only the glistening remnants of rain on the pavement. Henry pulled his coat tighter around himself, his gaze distant as he followed Donna toward her car. He didn't know what he expected to find when he saw Aaron again, but for the first time in years, he was ready to face it. The drive was quiet, save for the occasional sound of the windshield wipers brushing away remnants of the rain. The city lights thinned as they moved away from the main roads, the towering glass buildings giving way to smaller houses, the kind with chipped paint and porches that creaked under the weight of time. Henry sat in the driver's seat, fingers absently running along the edge of the locket, still resting in his palm. He hadn't spoken much since they left the diner, and Donna, sensing the storm in his mind, let the silence stretch between them. It had been years since he last set foot in this part of town. The memories were faint but present, lingering like the scent of something once familiar. The last time he had been here, he had stood on a doorstep with fists clenched, anger burning in his chest as Aaron Jones told him he would never be good enough for Bella. Now he was going back, but the fire in his chest had long since turned to something colder, something heavier. The tires crunched against the damp pavement as Donna pulled into the driveway of a small, weathered house. The porch light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the chipped wooden steps. Henry stared at the front door. It looked smaller than he remembered. "Are you sure about this?" Donna asked softly, her hands still resting on the steering wheel. Henry didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if he was. But he opened the car door anyway. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and something faintly medicinal. The living room was dim, the furniture unchanged from decades ago, save for the thin layer of dust that seemed to settle into the fabric. A framed photo of Bella sat on the mantel, her face frozen in time. Donna led him through the narrow hallway, her footsteps slow and cautious. "He's in there," she murmured, nodding toward the half-open door at the end of the hall. Henry didn't move. Through the gap, he could see a figure sitting in a worn-out armchair, the outline of a once powerful man now reduced to something smaller, frailer. Aaron Jones. His back was hunched, his shoulders slumped, and his hand trembled slightly as he reached for a cup on the side table. The air around him carried the weight of a man who had lived too long with his regrets. Henry stepped inside. Aaron's eyes flickered toward him, and for a brief second there was only confusion. Then recognition settled in, followed swiftly by something sharper. Resentment. "You," Aaron rasped, his voice cracked with age. But the anger in it was still alive. Henry met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "It's been a long time." Aaron scoffed, the sound bitter. "Not long enough." The words cut, but Henry didn't react. "You shouldn't be here," the old man muttered, turning his gaze toward the window. "Not after what you did." Henry frowned. "What did I do?" Aaron exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "She loved you," he murmured. "Loved you so much that it destroyed her." A muscle in Henry's jaw tightened. "I loved her too." "Not enough," Aaron snapped. His voice was weak, but the conviction in it was as sharp as ever. "If you had, you wouldn't have left her." "I didn't leave her." Henry's voice rose, the frustration cracking through his otherwise calm exterior. "You forced us apart. You made sure I couldn't even see her." Aaron turned to him then, his aged eyes holding something unreadable. "And I was right to do it." The air between them thickened, years of unspoken words pressing in from all sides. "You think you were right?" Henry let out a cold laugh. "You think locking her away, making her suffer, keeping her from the man she loved? You think that was right?" Aaron didn't answer. He simply stared at him, his fingers gripping the armrest as if steadying himself. Henry ran a hand through his hair, his breath heavy. "I spent years thinking she moved on," he said, his voice quieter now. "Years convincing myself that she had a life without me, that she was happy. And now I find out that she was trapped, that you took away her choices." Aaron's eyes flickered, something breaking for the briefest moment before the old bitterness returned. "You never knew what was best for her," he muttered. "She was supposed to have a future, a real future, not a struggling life with a boy who had nothing." Henry clenched his fists, but before he could respond, Donna stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Tell him, Aaron." The old man's expression hardened. "No." "Tell him the truth," she pressed. Aaron's grip on the chair tightened, his breath uneven. "It doesn't change anything." Henry turned to Donna, his patience running thin. "Tell me what?" Donna swallowed, her eyes glistening. "Bella." She started, voice unsteady. "She was pregnant when you two separated." Henry froze. The words didn't sink in right away. Donna stepped closer. "Aaron didn't just keep her away from you, Henry. He kept her locked away while she carried your child." Henry felt this lungs. His mind tried to catch up, tried to piece together the implications of what she was saying, but the words hit him like a blow to the chest. "She had a baby," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. Donna nodded, tears slipping down her face. She gave birth, Henry, but the complications... She didn't make it. Henry took a step back, his pulse roaring in his ears. The room felt too small, too suffocating. He looked at Aaron, his body shaking with something between grief and rage. "You let her die alone." Aaron didn't answer. Henry swallowed hard, his breath uneven. His child, Bella's child, alive. Where? The words barely formed. "Where is my child?" A noise came from the other room, a soft creak of a door opening. And then a boy stepped into the light. Henry turned, and his heart stopped. The child, 10 years old, with eyes that mirrored his own, stood in the doorway, staring at him with quiet curiosity. Henry felt his knees weaken, his hands trembling at his sides. His son. He had a son. And he had never known. The world had gone silent. Henry couldn't move, couldn't speak. The only sound was the faint ticking of an old clock in the corner of the room, each second stretching endlessly. The boy stood in the dim light of the hallway, his small frame barely filling the doorway. Barefoot, dressed in an oversized sweater that nearly swallowed his thin arms, he tilted his head slightly, watching the stranger in the living room with quiet curiosity. Henry stared. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and throat. The resemblance was undeniable. Those were his eyes, his face, his blood. For a moment, Lucas just stood there, unbothered by the tension hanging in the air. He glanced between Henry and Donna, sensing the weight of whatever had just transpired, but too young to understand its depth. Donna's voice was the first to break the silence, soft but steady. "Lucas, sweetheart," she said gently, stepping toward him. "Come here." The boy hesitated for only a second before padding forward, his small footsteps barely making a sound against the worn floorboards. He stopped beside his grandmother, looking up at Henry with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Henry swallowed hard, forcing words past the lump in his throat. "You..." His voice barely carried. He cleared it, trying again. "You're Lucas." The boy nodded. Henry dropped his gaze, exhaling shakily. Lucas. His son. A sharp sting pressed behind his eyes. The weight of it all was unbearable. 10 years had passed, and in all that time, he never knew. He had never even imagined. And yet, here he was, standing just a few feet away, breathing the same air. Lucas blinked up at him. "Who are you?" The question knocked the breath from Henry's lungs. Aaron stirred in his chair, shifting uncomfortably. "Donna, take the boy to his room," he muttered. "This isn't a conversation for him." But Henry didn't take his eyes off Lucas. He dropped to his knees before he even realized what he was doing, lowering himself until he was at eye level with the boy. His voice broke. He let out a shaky breath and tried again. "I'm Henry." Lucas watched him, his face unreadable. "Henry," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. Henry nodded, but his throat was too tight to speak. Donna glanced between them, then knelt beside the boy. She rested a hand gently on Lucas's back, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "Sweetheart," she murmured. "Henry is..." She hesitated, her voice catching. Then, as if steadying herself, she placed a hand over her heart. "He's your father." Lucas blinked. The word hung between them, a fragile thing, uncertain and unfamiliar. The boy's gaze flickered back to Henry, searching for something in his face. "My father?" Lucas echoed. Henry nodded, his fingers curling into the fabric of his slacks as if he needed something to ground him. For the first time in years, tears slipped down his face. He didn't even try to stop them. Lucas didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He just stood there, his small chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Henry forced himself to speak. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know about you." Lucas shifted on his feet, his expression unreadable. "Mum never talked about you." Henry's breath caught at the mention of Bella, the familiar ache crashing over him like a wave. "I wish she had," he murmured, voice thick. "I wish I could have been there." Lucas studied him carefully, his small brow furrowed. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he asked, "Are you sad?" The simplicity of the question shattered Henry. He let out a breathless, broken laugh. "Yeah, kid," he whispered. "Yeah, I'm sad." Lucas took another step forward, looking at Henry like he was something to be figured out. Then, without warning, he reached out. His small fingers brushed against Henry's tear-streaked cheek. The gesture, simple, unthinking, instinctual, was enough to break Henry completely. A sob tore from his chest as he reached for the boy, wrapping his arms around him, pulling him close, holding him like he was afraid to let go. Lucas tensed for a moment, unfamiliar with the embrace, but then slowly, cautiously, he relaxed into it. Henry pressed his face into the boy's dark curls, his shoulders trembling. This was real. Lucas was real. Warm and solid, and here, his son, his boy. "I'm so sorry," Henry choked out, voice muffled against Lucas's small shoulder. "I should have been here. I should have found you." Lucas didn't answer right away, but then, after a long moment, he murmured something so soft, so barely there, that Henry almost missed it. "You're here now." Henry clutched him tighter, and for the first time in a decade, he didn't feel so lost anymore. The days that followed were unfamiliar, a delicate dance between presence and distance. Henry found himself returning, unsure of how to navigate the space he had suddenly been given in Lucas's life. The first few visits, he arrived bearing gifts, the kind of things he thought a boy might want. Expensive sneakers, a new gaming console, a watch that was far too mature for a child. But each time he set a gift in front of Lucas, the boy only offered a small, polite nod, murmured a quiet, "Thank you," and returned to whatever he had been doing. The presents remained largely untouched. Henry didn't understand. He was used to solving problems with grand gestures, fixing things with money. But this wasn't something he could buy his way into. One afternoon, after another silent visit where Lucas barely looked up from his book, Henry stepped out onto the porch with Donna, running a hand through his hair. "He doesn't like them," Henry muttered, frustration creeping into his tone. Donna gave him a knowing look. "He doesn't need them." Henry exhaled, leaning against the wooden railing. "Then what does he need?" Donna studied him for a moment before answering. "You. Not your money. Not gifts. Just you." Henry let the words settle. He had spent years building an empire, making his presence impossible to ignore in business. But here, in his son's life, he was still a stranger. The shift came unexpectedly, on a quiet evening when Henry found Lucas sitting on the front steps, tossing a small, worn-out soccer ball against the ground. Henry hesitated, then sat down beside him. "You play?" he asked, nodding toward the ball. Lucas shrugged. "A little." Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I was never much of a soccer player," he admitted. "Terrible footwork. I tripped over the ball more than I kicked it." Lucas let out a small huff of amusement. Encouraged, Henry added, "Maybe you could teach me." Lucas glanced at him then, something unreadable in his expression. Then, with a quiet sigh, he picked up the ball and nudged it toward Henry with the tip of his shoe. Henry stared at it for a second before giving it a hesitant kick back. It wasn't much, Just a simple exchange, but it was the first time Lucas had willingly engaged with him. From that moment on, the visits felt different. Instead of expensive gifts, Henry started bringing books. Nothing extravagant, just simple stories. Lucas never said much when Henry handed him one, but later, Henry would find the books with dog-eared pages, small fingerprints pressed into the margins, a quiet sign that they were being read. One evening, Henry sat across from Lucas at the dinner table. Donna had gone into the kitchen, leaving them alone. Lucas was picking at his food, distracted. "Do you like stories?" Henry asked. Lucas nodded. Henry hesitated, then reached for the nearest book, flipping to a random page. "How about I read one to you?" Lucas didn't say no. He simply pushed his plate aside, resting his chin on his hands. Henry cleared his throat, feeling oddly nervous, but he began reading. Slowly, carefully, letting the words settle into the space between them. By the time he looked up, Lucas's eyelids were drooping. The boy had fallen asleep at the table. Henry stared at him, his chest tightening in a way he didn't quite understand. Then, moving carefully, he reached out and brushed the hair from Lucas's forehead. The boy didn't stir. And for the first time, Henry felt like he belonged there. The first time Lucas touched him intentionally, Henry nearly missed it. They had been walking back from the park, the evening air crisp, the world settling into the softness of twilight. Lucas walked a little ahead, kicking a small rock along the sidewalk. Without thinking, Henry slowed his steps to match the boy's. Then, Lucas reached out and grabbed his hand. It was small, warm, and so incredibly trusting. Henry's breath hitched, his heart thudding against his ribs. He didn't react right away, afraid that if he moved too suddenly, Lucas would pull away. But the boy didn't. He just kept walking, his fingers curled loosely around Henry's hand, as if this was something they had always done. Henry swallowed hard, his throat tight. This was more valuable than anything he had ever tried to give, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. That night, as Henry stood in the doorway watching Lucas sleep, Donna walked up beside him. "You're learning," she murmured. Henry let out a quiet breath, nodding. "Yeah," he admitted. "I think I am." Donna's gaze softened as she looked at him. "You're not just visiting anymore, Henry." Henry turned to her, brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" She gave him a small smile. "You're staying." Henry didn't answer right away, but as he looked back at his son, breathing steadily in sleep, he knew she was right. He wasn't just showing up anymore. He was becoming part of Lucas's life. And for the first time in 10 years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Aaron wasn't a man who softened easily. Even now, old and worn by time, he carried his bitterness with him, holding it close like an old injury that never quite healed. He rarely spoke when Henry was around, only acknowledging him with a grunt or a slow, disapproving glance. But he watched. Henry caught him sometimes, peering over the top of his newspaper as Lucas laughed at something Henry said, his wrinkled hands tightening around the edges of the pages. Other times, as Henry helped Lucas with his math homework at the kitchen table, Aaron sat in his worn armchair in the living room, eyes lingering just long enough to prove that he was listening. He never said a word, but he saw everything. One night, Henry stayed later than usual. Donna had gone to bed, and Lucas had curled up on the couch with a book, his eyelids heavy with sleep. Henry didn't have the heart to wake him, so he let him be. Aaron was still in his chair, seemingly asleep, his breathing slow and measured. Henry stood, stretching out his legs. He was about to leave when he noticed the old man's blanket had slipped off his lap, leaving his thin legs exposed to the cool night air. He hesitated. Then, carefully, he bent down and pulled the blanket back up, tucking it over Aaron's legs. It was a simple act, thoughtless in nature, until Aaron stirred. For a moment, Henry thought he had gotten away with it. But then the old man shifted, his eyelids flickering open just enough for Henry to catch the briefest glint of recognition. Aaron didn't say anything. Neither did Henry. The next morning, when Henry came by, Aaron still didn't speak to him. But when Donna set the coffee down at breakfast, she wordlessly placed an extra cup in front of Henry. It wasn't much, but it was something. One afternoon, Henry and Lucas sat on the porch steps, watching the sun sink lower into the sky. Lucas was absent-mindedly tracing shapes into the wood with his fingertip, his legs swinging slightly. "Grandpa doesn't like you very much," he said suddenly. Henry huffed a soft laugh. "Yeah," he admitted. "I noticed." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then, almost shyly, he murmured, "I think I do." Henry's breath caught. Lucas turned toward him, fidgeting slightly. "I mean, I like having you around." Henry swallowed, forcing himself to speak through the tightness in his throat. "I like being around, kid." Lucas nodded, as if that settled something inside him. Neither of them noticed Aaron sitting inside, his chair angled just enough toward the window. But he heard every word. The shift was small at first, almost imperceptible. But Henry felt it. Aaron didn't look at him with outright hostility anymore. The glares had dulled, the sharp remarks had faded into reluctant silence. There were even days when the old man seemed less bothered by Henry's presence. Then, one evening, as Henry sat at the kitchen table helping Lucas with a particularly stubborn math problem, Aaron cleared his throat from his usual spot in the armchair. "Lucas," he said gruffly, "go wash up before dinner." Lucas nodded, setting his pencil down and hurrying off. Henry started to stand, assuming his presence was no longer required, but Aaron's voice stopped him. "You any good at chess?" Henry blinked, turned. Aaron was still looking at his newspaper, not meeting his gaze, but his meaning was clear. Henry hesitated, then slowly sat back down. "I guess we'll find out," he said. Aaron grunted, reaching for the wooden chessboard on the side table. And just like that, the war between them shifted into something else. Something less like a battle, something almost like family. The house was unusually quiet. Donna had taken Lucas to the grocery store, leaving Henry and Aaron alone for the first time since Henry had returned. The absence of Donna's gentle hum in the kitchen and Lucas's small footsteps running across the floor made the house feel emptier, almost cavernous. Henry sat in the living room, his fingers tapping absently against his knee, debating whether to leave before the silence stretched into something unbearable. Then he heard it, a soft scrape of wood against the floor. He turned his head toward the kitchen and saw Aaron, struggling with his cane as he tried to pour himself a glass of water. His frail fingers trembled slightly, and as he reached for the pitcher, it slipped. Henry was moving before he even thought about it. The glass tipped, shattering against the tiled floor. Aaron cursed under his breath, gripping the counter for balance. "Here," Henry said, stepping forward. He grabbed a towel from the sink and knelt down, carefully picking up the broken pieces. Aaron scowled. "I can do it myself." "You'd cut yourself doing it," Henry muttered, sweeping the shards into his palm. Aaron didn't argue. He just stood there, watching as Henry cleaned up the mess in silence. Henry straightened, washed his hands, and poured a fresh glass of water before placing it on the table in front of Aaron. "Sit down before you fall over." Aaron grumbled something unintelligible, but eased himself into the chair. Henry pulled out the chair across from him and sat. The silence between them stretched, thick and unmoving. "You hate me," Henry said finally. Aaron let out a sharp exhale. "Hate's a strong word." "You sure?" Henry leaned back, crossing his arms. "You've done a good job convincing me otherwise." Aaron stared at him for a long moment before letting out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Maybe I did." The old man picked up his glass, his fingers curling around it, as if he needed something to hold on to. "Do you know what the worst thing about getting old is, Crawford?" Henry tilted his head slightly. "What?" "You've got too much time to think," Aaron muttered. "Too much time to sit in a chair and replay every moment you got wrong. Every choice you made that can't be undone. Too much time to know that regret is the only thing left that still keeps you awake at night." Something in Henry's chest tightened. Aaron took a slow sip of water. "You think I don't know what I did to Bella? You think I don't know what I took from her?" His voice was quieter now, rough around the edges, weighed down by something heavier than age. "I thought I was protecting her. I thought keeping her away from you meant keeping her safe, giving her a life without struggle." He exhaled, his breath shaking. "Instead, I killed her." Henry's stomach twisted. Aaron let out a bitter laugh. "And do you want to know the cruelest part?" He turned his eyes toward Henry, sharp despite the years that had dulled him. "I still blamed you for it." Henry swallowed hard, but Aaron didn't stop. "I blamed you because it was easier than blaming myself," Aaron admitted. "It was easier to be angry than to accept that I—" His voice broke slightly. He cleared his throat, tightening his grip on the glass. "That I was the reason she spent her last days in pain. That I was the reason she died alone." Henry's breath came uneven now, his pulse thrumming in his ears. "You think I didn't see it?" Aaron whispered, his voice suddenly raw. "You think I didn't see how she withered away after I took you from her? You think I don't hear her voice in my head every damn day?" Henry's throat burned. Aaron pressed a trembling hand to his forehead, his entire body shaking now. "I took her love from her, and when she left this world, she took mine with her." The confession shattered something in the air between them. Aaron let out a ragged breath, then his shoulders caved. And for the first time in his life, Aaron Jones wept. His frail body shook, his hand gripping the edge of the table as if he might collapse under the weight of it all. Henry had spent years dreaming of this moment, the moment Aaron would finally acknowledge his wrongdoing, would finally admit to what he had done. But now, watching the old man break apart in front of him, there was no satisfaction, no triumph, only pain. Henry's chest ached, his fingers curling into fists against his lap. And then, without fully understanding why, he reached across the table. His hand hovered for only a second before settling on Aaron's. The old man flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. For a long time, they sat there, two men drowning in the same grief. Aaron wiped at his face roughly, his voice cracking. "I can't bring her back." Henry swallowed, his own throat tight. "I know." Aaron squeezed his eyes shut, nodding weakly. Then, with a voice that was barely more than a whisper, he said the words Henry never thought he would hear. "I'm sorry." Henry closed his eyes. The words weren't enough to fix what had been broken. They weren't enough to bring back the years they had lost. But for the first time, they weren't enemies anymore. For the first time, they were just two men who had lost the same woman. And that, somehow, felt like a start. The offer came unexpectedly. They were sitting in the dimly lit living room, the quiet hum of the evening settling over them like a soft blanket. Lucas had long since gone to bed, and Donna was knitting on the couch, her needles clicking softly in the background. Henry sat across from Aaron, a cup of tea in his hands, something Donna had insisted on instead of coffee this late at night. Aaron looked tired, more so than usual. The weight of their last conversation still lingered between them. unspoken but present. "Move in with me," Henry said suddenly. The needles in Donna's hands stilled. Aaron's eyes flicked up from the rug. "What?" he asked, his voice rough from years of stubbornness. Henry shifted forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I have space," he said simply. "More than enough. You don't need to stay here. Lucas shouldn't have to grow up in a place that's falling apart." Aaron's jaw tightened. "This is our home." Henry nodded. "I know, but it doesn't have to be anymore." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You said it yourself. Regret is the only thing keeping you up at night. Don't let it keep you here, too." Donna reached out, placing a hand gently on Aaron's arm. "Maybe it's time, Aaron," she said softly. Aaron's fingers curled around the edge of his chair, the fight in him still there, but weaker. "I don't want your charity," he muttered. "It's not charity," Henry said, his voice steady. "It's family." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Aaron stared at him for a long time, before finally sighing, his shoulders slumping. "I'll think about it." And that was enough. The mansion felt too big at first. Lucas was the only one who adjusted immediately. The moment they arrived, he had taken off running through the vast halls, his laughter echoing off the high ceilings. He explored every room with wide-eyed wonder, pushing open doors and gasping at the sight of the massive backyard. "This place is huge," he exclaimed, spinning in the middle of the grand staircase. Henry watched from the doorway, his chest tightening at the sight. For the first time, the house didn't feel empty. Donna settled in just as easily. She took over the kitchen within a day, filling it with the scent of fresh bread and home-cooked meals. She moved around with purpose, wiping down counters and humming softly, as if she had always belonged there. Aaron was different. He spent most of his time in a chair by the window, staring out at the sprawling gardens, as if he wasn't sure whether he belonged. He was quieter than usual, his movements slower, his hands gripping the arms of his chair a little too tightly. But he was there, and that was more than Henry had ever expected. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Lucas was sitting at the kitchen island scribbling furiously in a notebook, while Henry stood by the counter, pretending to read a newspaper, but really just watching the boy work. "Hey, Dad," Lucas said absent-mindedly, not even looking up. Henry froze. His heart slammed against his ribs, his hands tightening around the edge of the paper. Lucas didn't even seem to notice what he had said. He just kept writing, his pencil scratching against the page. Henry swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "What did you say?" Lucas glanced up, blinking in confusion. "Huh? You—" Henry cleared his throat, his voice uneven. "You called me Dad." Lucas tilted his head. "Yeah." Henry stared at him, his chest feeling like it might collapse under the weight of the moment. Lucas frowned, setting his pencil down. "Is that okay?" Henry let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head as he stepped closer. He knelt down beside Lucas's chair, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Yeah," he whispered. "It's more than okay." Lucas grinned, then turned back to his notebook as if nothing monumental had just happened. But Henry knew. Everything had changed. Later that night, Henry found Aaron in the library, sitting in one of the leather armchairs, staring at an old photo of Bella. "You heard him, didn't you?" Henry asked quietly. Aaron didn't look up. "I did." Henry walked over, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey from the decanter on the table. He set one down in front of Aaron before taking a seat across from him. Aaron picked up the glass, rolling it between his fingers. "He's a good boy." "He is," Henry agreed. Aaron sighed, shaking his head. Bella would have been proud. Henry's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said softly. She would have. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Aaron lifted his glass slightly. To her, Henry's lips twitched into the faintest smile. To her. They clinked their glasses together, and for the first time, they weren't just two men haunted by the same ghost. They were a family. The afternoon sun stretched golden fingers across the estate, painting long shadows over the manicured gardens. The grand house, once an empty, hollow structure of wealth, now pulsed with life. Laughter echoed through the halls, the scent of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen, and the hum of conversation filled every space. Henry sat on the wide wraparound porch, the wood beneath his chair smooth from years of use. His once dark hair was now silver, his sharp features softened with time, but his presence remained just as strong. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, letting the quiet moments of the day settle around him. Then, a flurry of hurried footsteps. "Grandpa Henry!" A little girl, no more than 6, rushed toward him, curls bouncing wildly as she climbed into his lap. Henry chuckled, steadying her small frame as she beamed up at him with wide, familiar eyes. "You're getting faster, Ellie," he said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Ellie giggled, resting her head against his chest. "Daddy said you'd tell me a story." Henry raised a brow, glancing up to where Lucas stood a few feet away, arms folded, watching with an amused smile. "Oh, did he now?" Lucas grinned. She wouldn't take no for an answer. Henry sighed dramatically. "Well, I suppose I don't have a choice then, do I?" Ellie clapped her hands. "Nope." Henry chuckled, shifting her into a more comfortable position. The years had passed quicker than he ever thought possible. Lucas had grown into a man Henry was immensely proud of, strong, compassionate, and wise beyond his years. He had taken over Henry's business, but more importantly, he had turned it into something greater. Together, they had built charities, homes for the less fortunate, and scholarship programs for children who, like Lucas once had, needed a second chance at life. They had used wealth not just to build a legacy, but to change lives. And Henry had once feared that he would leave this world with nothing more than a name on a plaque and a fortune no one would truly remember. But now, as Ellie curled into him, waiting for a story, he knew he had built something far more valuable than money. Not all of time's changes had been gentle. Donna had passed first. Peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by family. Henry could still hear the echoes of her humming in the kitchen, and still remember the way she always seemed to know exactly what everyone needed, even before they asked. The house had felt emptier without her, but the warmth she left behind never truly faded. Aaron had lived longer than anyone expected. The same stubbornness that had once pushed people away had also kept him going. He had grown softer in his final years, spending his days watching Lucas become the man he had always hoped Bella's child would be. When the time finally came, he had gone quietly, sitting in his favorite chair by the window, staring out at the garden. His last words to Henry had been whispered, barely audible, but they had stayed with him ever since. Take care of them. And Henry had. At the time, he hadn't realized how much weight those words carried, how they would shape his choices, his purpose, his life. But as the years passed, and Lucas grew into the kind of man Bella would have been proud of, Henry knew he had kept his promise. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the porch. Ellie had settled against his chest, listening intently as Henry finished telling her a story about when Lucas was her age. "Daddy, did you really do all that?" she asked, turning her wide-eyed gaze to Lucas. Lucas chuckled, ruffling her curls. "Every word of it, kiddo." Ellie let out a small yawn, her tiny fingers curling into Henry's sleeve. "I think I want to do that too, when I grow up," she mumbled sleepily. Henry felt his chest tighten, his hand instinctively stroking her hair. "You will, sweetheart," he murmured. "You absolutely will." Lucas met Henry's gaze then, something unspoken passing between them, a deep understanding, a quiet gratitude. The once lonely man who had walked into a diner on a rainy night had built something he never thought possible, a family, a purpose, a legacy of kindness that would outlive him. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the evening settle over him. For the first time in his life, he had everything he had ever needed. The late afternoon sun cast long golden streaks across the estate's sprawling garden, bathing the neatly trimmed hedges and blooming flowers in a soft glow. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, mingled with the distant scent of bread baking in the kitchen, just like it had for decades. Henry sat on a weathered wooden bench beneath the old oak tree, his silver hair ruffled slightly by the evening breeze. His once powerful frame had softened with age, but his presence remained as steady as ever. Beside him, Lucas sat with quiet ease, stretching his legs out as they both watched the sun begin its slow descent beyond the hills. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Some silences didn't need filling. Finally, Lucas exhaled, breaking the stillness. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Henry tilted his head slightly, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "What does this place, this life?" Lucas gestured around them. "It's not the same house we walked into all those years ago." Henry hummed in agreement. "No," he murmured, "it's not." It had changed, not just in structure, but in spirit. The once empty mansion had become a home, filled with laughter, warmth, and love. It had seen family dinners, Christmas mornings, birthday surprises, and the simple joys of an ordinary Tuesday. It had witnessed loss, grief, and healing. It had become more than just walls and a roof. It had become theirs. Remembering the lost, Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was softer now. "Do you think about them often?" Henry knew who he meant. "Every day," he admitted. They didn't have to say Donna and Aaron's names out loud. Their presence was woven into every part of their lives. "Grandma would have loved how the kitchen turned out," Lucas said with a small smile. "She always talked about remodeling, but she never wanted to spend money on herself." Henry chuckled, the memory fond. "That sounds like her." "She wanted this house to be full of people," Lucas continued, his gaze distant. "She used to say it was too big for silence." Henry nodded, his fingers absently tracing patterns along the wooden armrest of the bench. She got her wish, and she had. The house had become exactly what Donna had always envisioned, a place where no one ever ate alone, where the doors were open to friends, where laughter spilled through the hallways. Even after she was gone, her love remained, lingering in the warmth of every room. Lucas let out a small sigh, his eyes flickering toward the far end of the garden. "And Grandpa," he said thoughtfully. "He changed, didn't he?" Henry smirked, shaking his head. "Eventually." Aaron had never been an easy man, but in his final years, he had let go of the past. He had softened, even if he never admitted it outright. The once bitter words had faded into quiet understanding, and the man who had once kept Henry away had, in the end, trusted him with his family. "When he passed," Lucas murmured, "I thought about how much he changed, how different he was from the man I first remember." Henry let out a slow breath. "People surprise you, kid, even when you think you know them." Lucas turned his head slightly, studying his father. "You surprised me too." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Lucas nodded. "When I was a kid, I thought you were just some stranger trying too hard to fit into my life." He let out a small chuckle. I didn't know how much I needed you. Henry swallowed, his throat tightening. Lucas sat back against the bench, letting out a small breath. You saved me, Dad, he said quietly. You didn't have to, but you did. Henry blinked, caught off guard by the weight of his son's words. After a moment, he exhaled, shaking his head. No, he said, voice thick with emotion. We saved each other. A father's satisfaction. The golden light softened, the first hints of dusk creeping into the sky. Lucas leaned back, stretching his arms behind his head. We did good, didn't we? Henry turned to look at him, the boy he had once met as a stranger, now the man he was proud to call his son. A slow, content smile crossed his lips. Yeah, he whispered. We did. For the first time in his life, Henry felt no weight of regret, no lingering sorrow from the past. He had once feared that he would leave this world with nothing but a fortune and a name on a plaque. But as he sat here, surrounded by the family he had built, he knew better. He had left something far more valuable than money. A home, a legacy, a love that would last beyond his years. Henry closed his eyes, letting the last warmth of the day settle over him. A feeling of peace is embracing him. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.